The fact is, when it's happening, and this is very common in cults, is we often can look back and see how it was freaky or wrong or weird. And we can say, oh, we should have saw that, or how did people do that? But when you're in the moment, everyone's convinced that this is okay. Welcome back to Shannon Shares. I'm Shannon, and today I'm sharing a short summary of the cult story that I've been investigating for the last 6 months. If you're starting and you're new here, welcome. I'm happy you're here. This is actually my own story of how I was groomed by my youth pastors who became cult leaders. If you're returning, thank you so much. I'm really glad that you're here, and it's been amazing to build this community. This is going to serve as a beginning for those of you who are new, but also as a sort of closure for those of you who have been following along. I actually felt this closure the moment I named my abusers. Not that this story will ever truly be closed entirely. I'm sure in the future I'll have updates and PS videos where if another survivor wants to share, I give them that opportunity. Through this journey, there's been a lot that's happened. So I'm going to give you an update in a video essay form that's a little bit shorter and more concise. And if you wanted to share it with someone, they could watch it in a shorter form video. Let's get started, shall we?
There's such fulfillment and purpose, growth that we've had as individuals, as our family. Watching our children grow and mature is amazing, and for some of them, it's a miracle.
It's a miracle.
Before I tell you my cult story, I've got to give you a little bit of background about the leaders of the cult that I was in. Mark and Leslie Dollar. Mark was from Georgia, and Leslie was from Arkansas. They met during college at Asbury College in Kentucky. They got married and became youth pastors. They claimed to be Methodists before moving to Arkansas around 2003, which is where our stories collide. By this time, Mark and Leslie had several children and had been in youth ministry for a little while. Right when they came to Arkansas, there's another entity that crossed their paths that's important to our story now. It is called the Ramp.
The ramp.
The ramp.
The ramp.
And it's located in Hamilton, Alabama, ran by a televangelist singer named Karen Wheaton. It's been on TV multiple times on Christian networks, and it also has a heavy following within the hyper-charismatic evangelical church. Mark and Leslie came across this and quickly adopted and implemented their techniques, we will call them, which included ministry and dance teams that were made up of young people and teenagers. They become very charismatic. Now, this was actually a pretty popular youth group, although not as popular as they say in some of their own interviews. You can learn more about that if you want to check out my whole playlist on this called How Not to Join a Cult. So what do I mean by being hyper-charismatic? It was a little beyond just dancing and singing type worshiping. You know, think Jesus Camp if you've ever seen that documentary. It is very self-sacrificial, like I'm here to be a stepping stone for God, a martyr, which is somebody who dies for a cause.
I want to be a living martyr.
And also preached a lot of being nameless and faceless, which was a really important technique that went on to be a problem in the cult. Basically, at 14, I decided that I wanted to have a better life for myself. I had a troubled childhood that was full of a lot of complex trauma, and I had done drugs at a young age and a lot of other things, just mostly because I wasn't protected. But I was smart enough to go, I want to do something different. So I joined this church, which I had been to once or twice before, and that's how I came across Mark and Leslie Dollar. I really wanted to impress them. I wanted them to notice me because every child who's vulnerable is hungry for some type of validation and nurturing. And so quickly they adopted me in. I was on their ministry team. We did dancing and drama, which is really popular. Think the everything skit. You know the one. Except ours was a bit more, again, dark and dramatic, all about stirring the pot. Mark and Leslie were very adamant about having to worship a certain way in order to be pleasing God. That's where it became a problem because it wasn't just self-expression, but there was a lot of pressure to fit this mold perfectly. And of course, those of us who were on this ministry team were spending a lot of time with Mark and Leslie. I believe this is whenever they began to groom us. because we already knew from some of my videos I've shared before that they were planning on having some sort of youth outreach or wanting to do that at some point. And so they'd been taking more and more of our time through pressure and guilt, but also inviting us over to their house, everything being very hunky dory at first, complimenting us publicly, but also humiliating us publicly, like crossing that line a little, but not enough to actually defer most of us. And they were also emotionally becoming close to us. And Mark at this time was already becoming inappropriately close to many of the young women. Leslie was the main pastor who did most of the preaching, though Mark also would preach too. And Leslie was very hellfire brimstone and very damnation oriented, claiming that you need to be a Christian 24/7, which means being in prayer 24/7, having a very strict guideline of how you were expected to act, think, say, or do. Next point in the story was they had begun to convince all of us who were on the ministry team and who were close to them to begin coming to Sunday church. This was a very small church, very humble. They just wanted to have a few basic songs, have their sermon, gather a little bit, and disperse. That was demonized by Mark and Leslie. They claimed that church like that was defying the Holy Spirit. So they convinced us to be very hyper charismatic in those settings. So, for instance, they were done with worship and they were trying to transition into the sermon, and they had convinced us to stay up front and continue praying out loud. And it was very disruptive from the outside. But to us, it was not being afraid to scream to the masses and stuff. I don't know. It totally goes against the whole like don't pray in public and all that, but they seem to make a lot of loopholes in all of this logic. Understandably, this created some rifts in the church, and Mark and Leslie claimed that they had to choose between their Adullam Youth Ministry and the church, but what was true was that they had done this and it was being addressed with them, and they were just upset that they were being told, hey, can you not do that? So they got pissed off and made an excuse to leave. And that's whenever they had officially started Adullam Youth Outreach. It was about 2007. They believed that they were somehow more superior to pretty much everybody. All of you are sleeping churches, most likely, unless you're the ramp. Now, we are Adullam Youth Outreach. Let's talk a little bit more about the abuse allegations. And I want to give a trigger warning. We are going to talk about some hard things and a lot of spiritual abuse too. And it can be triggering for some people. So here's your warning. The way it was preached to us was you can come here and it's a safe place for you to seek God and have fun in a safe environment with a purpose and be a part of a ministry. It was a great way to manipulate us and any parents who did have concerns. And I will say, there were parents who were very protective and caring for their children. Mark and Leslie really like to demonize the outside world, which is one part of their abuse, control, and isolation. Every person outside of Adullam is unfortunately living in sin, unless Mark and Leslie approve of them. They claim that they didn't exert control like cult leaders do, but they did, especially in this sense, because the only people who could truly hear from God were Mark and Leslie. And if you questioned them, then you were also demonized and probably not hearing from God, including about your own body and your own needs, essentially taking away autonomy. As I said, though they said that we were just seeking God, they were also starting another narrative, especially when it benefited them, of saying that they were a youth outreach for troubled teens or homeless teens, and later addicted teens, suicidal teens, whatever benefited them. Though I was a part-timer at first, any person who was a part-timer or who did not live there permanently were slowly sucked in to do more and more, just as we were whenever we started the church with them. More and more pressured and guilted to be a part of them and cut ties with a lot of other things. Trademarks of the cult leaders being the only people who can decide who is holy enough and who is not. So anybody who is outside of them, whether that be a church or your family, are sinning and asleep and not living the way that God wants. They did this through psychological and spiritual manipulation and abuse. What that means is they would take scripture, for instance, deny your mother and father and come after me. And if you don't do this, you can't be my disciple. I believe it's Luke 14:26. They would use that a lot and say we needed to cut the umbilical cord, that it was time to do what God had as a purpose for us. Another way they would do this is by shaming us, saying that we were sinful or we were following our flesh and didn't want to do what God was telling us to do, which was what they were telling us to do. Numerous other scriptures that would be way too long to go through in this entire video would constantly gaslight us and make us feel like our feelings weren't valid, or make us feel like what we experienced didn't actually happen. In addition to the isolation, the control, the psychological and spiritual abuse, there was also constant child labor, constantly building and remodeling in their home, constantly taking care of their kids, to the point where their kids were calling some of these girls mom. There was constant remodeling of other facilities and churches for free, constant ministry in between all of this. We were pressured and expected to tell very intimate details of our life, including our abuse, as testimony on stage before we were even 18 and old enough to consent. During all of this, Mark and Leslie were pocketing hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I estimate that they've made at least $1 million. Not only were they frequently using children and young adults for free labor and exploiting them, but they were also claiming some kids out from under their parents on taxes without permission. They wanted some kids to stay with them for longer amounts of time in order to get more tax breaks. In fact, once they lured me into being full-time and staying with them, they wouldn't let me leave. I expressed numerous times that I wanted to, but I was constantly pressured, gaslit, manipulated, and told that my dad was a bad person and that I was going to fall more into sin if I went back. This also happened after I expressed to them that I was having unalive ideations, and I told them how I was going to do it. Whenever I told them that, they told me that it was the devil, and they didn't get me help or take away any medication or inform my parents. This isn't just a singular story. Things like this happened to so many other kids, and every single one of us were exploited for labor. There are so many examples of labor that it would take so long to go through all of it here. Again, this is a summary video. There were also instances of physical abuse, which is something that's been hard for me to truly let sink in. But there were instances of Mark getting really angry, body slamming people. He's grabbed people by the throat, by the collars, by the clothing. He slammed kids against the wall. He also has towered over people while publicly humiliating them, screaming down at them in front of the entire group of mixed company, asking them really weird questions about like who they were imagining when they were masturbating. Mark also was inappropriately close with several of the girls, even having them massage his feet late at night. Mark would often make some of the girls feel that they were in on certain jokes, and would tell the boys whenever he was getting or not getting his needs met, including how he wanted his needs to be met, or the lack thereof. I consider a lot of their behavior, looking back, as not only a mental health therapist, but from a lot of different opinions, that they were grooming us. It was grooming. Though we don't have any instances of them crossing the line, they did cover up SAs. So there was an SA from one kid to another, which they never reported. And then someone who was on their board, they were repeatedly warned about being a predator, this board member. Then they accepted cruises from that board member. Meanwhile, he had assaulted a child that they allowed to go with him. Whenever they learned about it, they didn't report it. They didn't get the child help. They didn't get the child counseling. You know what else they didn't do? They didn't remove him from their board. He remained on their board until 2021, whenever they dissolved and fled Arkansas. Let's talk a little bit more about the dissolution. Tell you a little bit about how I left. I had told them that I was thinking about hurting myself. They didn't get me help. Well, 3 months later, I did try to harm myself, and that's whenever my family finally stepped in. So that's how I left. That actually happened almost 2011. So I was almost 18. They continued to go on. They started in 2007. I left in almost 2011, and they went on until 2021. They harmed so many kids that came after me. In 2020, a few of the girls who had survived Mark and Leslie's abuse created a Facebook survivors group. The group quickly grew in numbers, and currently we have almost 50 people in this group. This does not include the families who were hurt and people who were in close proximity. Now, they claim to have helped over 200 kids, which is a complete lie. That is a huge exaggeration. If that's true, then I want to know how many kids are still in contact with them, because we have calculated most of the kids who have been there over the years, and most of them are in our group. Our group quickly grew, and Mark and Leslie did find out about it, which we're not surprised. That does happen because people have a hard time leaving cults. They go back and forth many times, and so a lot of people have lived with Mark and Leslie a couple times before they finally left. That's how they got wind of this group happening. They claimed that they would be ready if we had a lawsuit. And they also freaked out about it, which we found out later. So this happened in 2020 during COVID, of course. And by 2021, they had their house up for sale. And they got the heck out of Dodge as soon as they could. They moved to Hamilton, Alabama. Guess what's in Hamilton, Alabama? The ramp.
We love being here in Hamilton at the ramp.
So they got to move closer to their cult, dissolving their outreach officially. And what did they do with all that money? Because technically you're supposed to donate it to other shelters or give it over to the government. Not only do we have evidence of Mark and Leslie being abusive, but there's been a lot of evidence of the ramp being abusive. And even some of the kids in our survivors group or who are within our outskirts were also taken advantage of by the ramp. During that entire timeline, Mark and Leslie were rubbing elbows with the ramp. As their oldest children got older, they actually sent their children to the Ramp's School of Ministry, which is not an official university or organization. You don't actually get any credits for going there. But they sent their kids there, and that's how they began to rub elbows with the Ramp, Karen Wheaton, and they got in. So when they moved to Hamilton and Marion County in Hamilton, Alabama, they've been working together. Let's talk a little bit about the last 6 months. This is exactly how I got involved in starting this channel and talking more about my experiences and also doing the research that I've been doing with other survivors. In December or January of 2024, 2025, several people began speaking out about the ramp. I joined with them to tell my story about Mark and Leslie, who were also involved in the ramp. I knew that they were there and involved, but they were way deeper than I thought they were. When I named them publicly, it did get a lot of attention, which I was really surprised but happy about. And it confirmed for a lot of people what they already thought, which was that there was a lot of weird stuff going on there. Whenever I outed them, Mark actually deleted his Facebook. He's been super incognito since I named them publicly. Tons and tons of people were validated about their abuse at the ramp and within ministries of all kinds that are associated just like mine. But there are also a lot of supporters who still believe that even though there are hundreds, if not thousands, of allegations against them, they are innocent. And that people are simply offended, not able to abide by God's law, and hurt or selfish. They also believe that people are just doing it for fame. Marion County really like Mark and Leslie and have continued to seemingly support Mark and Leslie and the ramp despite all of our allegations. Throughout all this, I learned a lot more about Mark and Leslie's clouded history and was unable to deny that they were horrible. I do feel like the word got through to a lot of people who have been hurt by this sector of Christianity. I also learned that this is actually really common, and unfortunately, there's just not a lot that's done about it. I've had a lot of questions about why police wouldn't intervene, and I think the fact is when it's happening, and this is very common in cults, is we often can look back and see how it was freaky or wrong or weird, and we can say, oh, we should have saw that, or like, how did people do that? But when you're in the moment, everyone's convinced that this is okay. And police want more than that. They want current, they want hard proof, and mental health, even though eyewitnesses are proof. And, if we wanted to sue, we could. A group of people who say they've had the same experience is in fact evidence. It's just so hard. It's so difficult. It's hard on the survivors. It's hard for the police to get people like this. It's hard to see it in the moment, but when you look back, you can see a lot. And I think even Mark and Leslie had some suspicious things and people who had begun to see through what they were doing. The same side, they also had people who were continuing to support them despite more and more claims coming forward. Very similar in the ramp culture as well. Just like a lot of other evangelical churches, it's been all over the place. The stories are numerous. There is a whole sector on TikTok of religious trauma in general. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed my recap, and I hope that this has served as a beginning for those of you who might want to get to know more about this story, and also as a wrap up and a summary from what's happened so far to those of you who have been following along. I really appreciate the community that we've built, and the best way to help me is to subscribe. And I'm actually planning on doing a lot more diverse content in the future. I think I'm ready to explore possibly commenting on like current events, particularly things that I think are maybe harmful to mental health, but also talking about healing from traumas like this. I've talked a lot about my story, and I feel so much closure. And I'm ready to move on and do more of what makes me happy today, because today I live a great life and I'm really healed from all this. And now that I've shared the word and it's out there and people know our side of the story and the truth, I am just ready to start diving into more of the things that I've done, that I've overcome, and that's made my life happy. A really big love hate relationship with making content. The filming part, ugh, I hate that one the most. Thank you so much. Goodbye.